Relax and listen to the voice. Welcome back to the channel, everyone. This installment includes stories that we have personally sought out and requested permission from the authors to use. Some of these stories come from unpublished authors, some unknown authors. However, with that said, all of these authors deserve recognition because they're putting out great, creative, scary, and thought-provoking stories. And here we go. Restoration. It was June when my grandfather died. I didn't have a great relationship with the man. He was something of a recluse, and I only really saw him on the holidays. I was told that he died from a heart attack, but it was hard for the coroners to tell what the state of decomposition his body was in. It took months before he was discovered hunched over in his study. An IRS agent was sent to his home after several warnings about late taxes. They finally called the cops after their knocks weren't answered. The foul stench of decay could be smelled from the porch. It was a closed casket funeral, and nobody shed any real tears for him. What really surprised me was the reading of the will. I had apparently inherited my grandfather's entire estate. Even stranger was the fact that not a single member of my family had any objections to it, just silent nods of agreement, as though they wanted nothing to do with the man or his money, even after death. He lived in a lovely little house in the suburbs that looked quite adorable from the outside. The interior was a different story. It was packed with old magazines, random memorabilia, broken appliances, and general trash. Cleaning all of it out took weeks of work, and at the end I had filled 3 dumpsters full. Finally I'd made it up to the attic. The dust layered every surface in thick clumps. There were boxes everywhere filled with old Christmas ornaments, family photos, and paintings. I would have lumped it all in with other garbage, but there was a chance there could be something of actual value in here. Tucked away in the back of the space was an old antique grandfather clock. There was some way that the light hit it that made the surface shine. It looked almost pristine, like it was polished the day before. I couldn't help but to stare at it for a few minutes. I didn't even feel my hand open the case and lift the pendulum. The mechanism clicked to life as hundreds of tiny gears spun in tandem. I watched as the inner workings moved in hypnotizing perfection. I must have been staring at it for hours because suddenly the hands were joined together at 12 o'clock. I will never forget the chiming. The melodic tones it created were the most magnificent sounds that I've ever heard. Words fail to fully express how enamored I was with this treasure. The thing was a priceless artifact, and I wanted everyone who came inside to see it. I was trying to be as safe as possible as I carried it down the stairs, but the old wooden boards snapped under my weight. The clock hit the ground with a sickening crack as its innards flew across the floor. My heart was crushed as I saw the beautiful vessel split upon the ground. I scooped up all the pieces and moved it all to the workplace in the garage. When I started, I had absolutely no experience with clockwork, but I needed to hear the melody again. I tried to look up videos on how to fix broken clocks, but the mechanism that played the music was unlike anything I could find on the internet. This machine was a handcrafted original. In the next few months, I became determined to restore it. I locked myself away from the prying eyes, and I never thought about hiring a professional out of fear that they might try to steal it. This was my melody. I had inherited it, and I would be the one to listen to it. Replacing broken parts was the most difficult part of the process. Some gears were custom made, and I had to get in contact with some local metal workers. Then I found a few even more unique broken pieces. They were small, light, and delicately carved. At first, I thought that they might have been porcelain, but upon closer inspection, I discovered that they were, in fact, bone. This perplexed me more than anything. I tried to use other materials to make a copy of it, but they just wouldn't move the right way. They didn't have the grip or unique malleability that the shattered bone pieces must have had. That should have been the end of it. I should have given up. But in the dead of night, I could still hear pieces of that tune. That sweet melody was fading just on the edge of my memory. It wormed its way into my mind and would not let go. I know that clock was taunting me. It had shown me a taste of its beauty for it to just take it away. I needed to fix it no matter what it took. I started with chicken bones. When that failed, I trapped the mice and squirrels that were in my yard. Their skeletons were always too frail. One day the neighbor's dog got loose and wandered into my yard. With a pale hand, I held a bit of meat out as I beckoned the little Rottweiler inside. I let it down into my basement, where I bashed its skull in with a loose bit of masonry. It wasn't enough. It was never enough. The clock wanted bigger, sturdier bones. I knew in the back of my mind that they needed to be human. I could no longer deny this apparent truth. It was a cold night when I dug up my grandfather's pathetic old corpse. My hands pulled and ripped his decaying flesh apart as I found my prize. I knew it couldn't have been that easy. The decomposition was too far gone for the mechanism to work. There had to be somewhere I could find younger, fresher parts. I watched the mailman closely for weeks until his route had been committed to memory. He was the perfect candidate, a loner that nobody would miss. Just watching his joints flex as he opened the car door or swiveled his head back to look at the passing jogger made my mouth salivate. My thin fingers were wrapped tightly around a sharpened screwdriver as I waited in the back of the mail truck. His eyes went wide when I plunged it into his neck. I could hear the man trying to speak through bloody gurgles, but I simply told him to be quiet and be glad that his body would be used for something greater. It was a strange feeling as life faded through my arms. Every time I tried to think about it, the sounds of beautiful chiming would fill my mind. I dragged the cadaver down to the basement where I quickly removed all the useless muscle, skin, and flesh. I cleaned all the appropriate pieces in a solution to keep them preserved. This was a process that I slowly became quite accustomed to. The bones had to be carved with complete perfection. Any abnormalities were unacceptable, and I would be forced to go out and find another. I sacrificed 8 people to the clock before it was finally finished. My blood-smeared hands moved the pendulum again. Tears of pure ecstasy flowed out of my eyes as I heard the chimes, but before the song could run its course, the mechanism caught. It strained as pressure built inside of it, and then, crack! A horrible snapping sound came from the inner workings as they burst apart. There was a hatred that bubbled up from my stomach. I realized the clock stopped itself on purpose. It didn't want me to be satisfied. I screamed and I cursed the infernal contraption as I pounded my fists against the case. Suddenly the glass gave in and my arms pushed through into the mess of gears. Hundreds of cuts covered my skin. My fingers were mangled in the hungry teeth of cogs and screws. I lay there in the workshop across from the clock, writhing in pain. My reflection looked back at all of those tiny shards that covered the floor. I looked so sick and skinny. I couldn't remember the last time I ate. And then I could hear it. The melody. It was coming from somewhere. I tried to strain my ears. It was October when my cousin died, just a few months after they inherited our grandfather's estate. Now all of that has been passed down to me. This surprised me because we had never had a close relationship. Their house was a mess and smelled rancid. Trash and tea trays were strewn everywhere. I knew I would have to get the place deep cleaned and repaired, maybe even torn down entirely. The only thing that seemed to remain untouched by decay and filth was a pristine grandfather clock in the garage. It seemed to shine like it was polished the day before. I didn't even feel my hand open the case and lift the pendulum. Concrete. The night was strangely silent as Erin drove down the lone road. The only light she had was the dim, flickering glow of her car's headlights. The trees passed by so quickly they were only a blur, yet their shadows seemed to linger just a little bit longer before disappearing. She sighed, a chill running down her spine. This was Erin's least favorite part of her trip home from work. Sure, there were other routes she could have taken, but this one was the shortest. And getting back as soon as possible was crucial, since all she wanted to do was flop down on her bed and sleep after that exhausting roller coaster of an evening shift at the restaurant. She'd discovered this odd shortcut a month ago, after accidentally taking a wrong turn and ending up on a cracked concrete road that Erin swore wasn't there before. Against her better judgment, she'd followed the eerily straight path and found that it conveniently led all the way to her small house. Erin would be lying if she said it didn't give her the creeps, but what was she to do? She didn't want to waste time waiting for the glaring red stoplights to turn green, or deal with half-brained idiots that clearly had no idea how to drive. She stared ahead at the seemingly never-ending path, yawning. Just a couple more minutes and you'll be home. You can do this, she told herself. But as she continued, Erin started to notice that something was wrong. Very wrong. She slowed the car down a bit to check her phone. The time read 9:30 p.m. A terrible feeling grew in her gut. She was supposed to have been home 15 minutes ago. Had she gotten lost? No, that wasn't possible. The shortcut was just a straight road. No turns, no other paths connecting to it. Just a straight road. The terrible feeling grew worse. No problem, she thought nervously. I'll use the GPS. But as she tapped her car's screen to open up her map, it violently flashed through multiple colors, bright enough to almost blind Erin. She stopped the car, opening a map on her phone. All it showed was the little blinking icon that represented her, standing in the middle of a black void. Her heart began to pound. Calm down, Erin. Calm down, Erin, she whispered to herself, taking deep breaths. Just keep going. She knew it was probably a bad idea, but she didn't know what else to do. She could turn around, go back the way she came, but something told her that wouldn't end well. She pressed on the gas pedal and the car lurched forward. The trees suddenly seemed taller, more menacing, pressing in on the sides of the road. Erin gripped the steering wheel tightly. The road ahead grew narrower and narrower until the car's wheels were right on the edge of the path. Taking a deep breath, Erin glanced in the rearview mirror. That was the first mistake she made. Her heart almost stopped when she saw what was behind her car. A tall, shadowy figure, vaguely humanoid, but with limbs too long for it to be considered human, stood in the middle of the road. Its long, claw-like fingers hung limply from its arms, swaying slightly in the wind. What was even more terrifying were the eyes covering its entire form, just staring at her through the windows and mirrors. Aaron choked back a scream, eyes darting away and foot pressing the gas pedal harder. The car sped along the road. The outline of the trees were no longer visible. Aaron's knuckles were white from holding the wheels so tight. And the road itself? It was still just an endless path of gray concrete. She wanted to get home so badly it hurt. She wanted whatever was going on to end. She decided that she would never, ever use this road again. Aaron took one more look in the rearview mirror. The figure was gone. She let her foot gently ease off of the gas pedal and sighed in relief. That was her second mistake. She closed her eyes for a few moments, letting her beating heart slow. Now, just to get back up. A loud thump broke into her thoughts, and Aaron's eyes flew open. Staring right back at her, latched onto the hood of her car, was the figure. Aaron allowed herself to scream this time. Her hands shaking violently, she shifted the gear into reverse and practically stomped on the pedal. The car sped backwards, and she had to stop herself from falling due to the motion. The creature's claws dug into the metal, but the vehicle was moving too fast for it to hold on for much longer. The claws screeched as they slid off of the car, leaving large gashes behind. The creature rolled onto the road. It let out a noise that sounded like a coarse laugh, and all of its eyes turned to look at Aaron. Adrenaline took over. Without a moment's hesitation, she jerked the gear to fifth, and the car shot straight towards the creature. Her breathing quickened. Her entire body felt numb. Burning fear crawled through her stomach. Time seemed to almost slow down. Everything blurred together. The car jolted upwards for a moment, and it was over. Aaron slowed to a halt, sitting there for a few moments while her head spun. Was the creature dead? She didn't know, and she wasn't sure if she wanted to know. Yet she still opened the door and stepped outside her car. That was her third mistake. Her knees felt like jelly, still shaking from adrenaline and fear. Aaron turned towards the road behind her car. She expected to see some sort of carcass, or at least blood, if the thing even had any, but there was nothing there. She blinked a few times, confused. She ran over it with her car. She knew that for a fact. Had she imagined the entire thing? Or, the more horrifying thought, was it still alive? The hair at the back of Aaron's neck prickled, and her palms began to sweat. She knew the answer before she even turned around. It lunged at her. She tried to duck out of the way, but failed. Her head hit the hard concrete, and the world began to spin. She managed to push herself upwards, only to be knocked down again by the creature. Its claws dug into her shoulders, and she tried to scream, only to find that her voice wouldn't work. Its face leaned inches over hers, blankly staring at her terrified expression. It let out another laugh. Aaron would have cried at the stupidity of it all, if she could. Her gut had told her something was wrong, and she chose to ignore it. She had nothing else to blame except for her own impatience, and now all she could do was watch, paralyzed, as the creature sliced open her skin with its sharp claws and tore through her insides. Her vision darkened at the edges. Her entire body burned with cold, numb pain, and she attempted another scream that only resulted in a choked gurgle. The nauseating smell of blood filled the air, drowning her senses. The creature laughed again, enjoying her death. Erin closed her eyes. Even in her final moments, all she could picture in her mind was the dreary concrete road, the same as it always was. Empty, bleak, endless. The Boy Who Loved Flies. Peter was fidgeting. He was seated in Kaiser Lobby for a while, accompanied by his mother. There was a blue-haired white girl across from him with a lot of small, circular badges on her purse that spoke as much as her perky, catty glasses. It was quiet. The TV kept on playing Aladdin from circa 9000 BC. Apart from them, there was a blonde kid of 6 or 7 with pale skin, almost like albinoism, who was also restlessly moving around. Peter was overweight, had curly hair, and was dressed in a half-sleeve checked shirt. He was reading a monograph on Drosophila melanogaster, or the common fruit fly, and its various usage in technological and scientific advancement, especially in studies of genetics. Perhaps the name was Pat, for he had a Peter Pan syndrome. He was 36 and never had a girlfriend. His teeth were yellow, and his mother had to force him not to neglect his stubs and body odor. The odd thing about Peter was he was not into comics or video games or even anime. Yes, some like RC cars, drones, miniature figurines, action figures, or collecting playing cards, but Peter loved flies. Peter was obsessed with flies. It was his all-consuming passion. Every single waking wisp of breath he took was converted into cubic centigrams of carbon dioxide after his brain's combustion engine churned it out into either an arcane curio or some weird fact about flies deep in the recess of his mind. Whether it be referencing Pliny the Elder, or perhaps ditching his college classes to go to UCI Ayala Science Library for a specialized fix on damselflies from the galleys of references that folded into folds, like an accordion with various aisles themselves, tucked and folded inside itself like an overworking, overproduced neocortex. Dr. Selina C. Asher peered over her brittle lenses. It was about 3 months since she saw him. There was no change. Cases like this usually don't. She was more concerned as to the cause of this. Ever since an episode, Peter's mother brought him here. He was gripping a tome on the 3,000 species of mayflies. Peter couldn't get enough. He wanted to study all about them. He wanted to know each and every one of their names, taxonomy, scientific names, breeding patterns, size, lifespan, colors, anatomy, etc. He didn't even touch his Cheerios. They all became soggy. Sarah was getting late for her nursing class and was becoming more irked by the minute. "Hurry up, will ya?" she said, mildly chiding. Peter didn't look up. He was a very docile and easygoing fellow, and known to be really jolly amongst his peers, as much of a loner as he was. He had an orthopedic grip around the cusp of the hardcover. "Did you hear?" Sarah nudged. "Do not ever talk to me like that!" Suddenly Peter thundered. Sarah was stunned, as if seeing a colobus monkey appearing right out of her rice cooker. She was never before aware of his rage. Yes, she was a single mom, and Peter always had daddy issues, but that Saturday, November 14th, was the first time Sarah noticed him behaving like this after he rushed to his room, locked himself up, and missed his class. Then everything went downhill. He neglected his studies and increasingly was absent from his college courses. Later, Sarah found out he was moonlighting in the university libraries, reading up on nothing but flies. Of course, Peter was always like this since he was 6 and received his first bug examiner kit from his grandma. The ullage left by an absentee father was filled by this. He would take his forceps and pincers and magnifying glass and would minutely and gently detach the gossamer wings of butterflies, bugs, and insects, or pin the thorax to a board after dousing it with God knows what chemicals, possibly formaldehyde, and wither away endlessly in the susurrus wrestles of asymptotic length of time and infinite. But he was not one of those twisted kids. He was always sure to be gentle. Eventually Sarah would make the appointment, and Peter was diagnosed with OCD and ADHD and prescribed Ritalin after Adderall was making him too agitated and panicky. Monomania. That's what they said, right? Sarah, despite not coming from an intellectual background, was modestly intelligent and was no mug. Her father was a simpleton or a country bumpkin and your typical Idaho farmer, and her mother a housewife. No one attended college in the family, and juggling 3 jobs and a son, she already had too much on her plate. She knew that people liked stamps, movies, coins, and etc., but to pursue it to such extent as to go down the rabbit hole of social media to learn and know each and everything about flies smacked of a serious issue. They were divorced even before she was born. She remembers one odd time during potty training when a fly was buzzing on the stool, and it seemed to affect the toddler. Peter recoiled, and she faintly remembers the apparition after all these years. Of course, such obsession wasn't entirely unknown. Sarah remembers how one of her girlfriend's brother-in-law once walked out of his wedding, right dab in the middle of the DJ playing Maroon 5 too, whilst being enamored by a European starling that seemed to be very rare in that neck of the woods, due to him being an amateur birdwatcher and all. "Are you sleeping well?" "Yes," Peter replied softly. "Any change of appetite?" "No." "Are you taking the medications?" "Yep." "Are you having thoughts of suicide or hurting anyone?" "No." "Are you still following up with Araceli?" The doctor referred to the therapist. "Yes." Few more monosyllabic dialogue ensued. The dopamine started surging as soon as the door was ajar, and the patient was let out with the mom standing outside. Peter now has all the time in the world to read about each and every mayfly species from the list of 3,000. His mother was ebullient for some reason. Is it because today was exceptionally tiring? She decided to treat him to McDonald's. "You're just a weirdo," the kids said. All Peter wanted was a hit, but the others weren't sure if he would be able to handle the THC. Jesus wasn't being mean or evil. This is what most people don't understand about bullies. The bullies or a group are not necessarily mean doing a nah name-calling prank or calling a kid Virgin Mama's boy. It's more a cold, calculative, salient and subtle machination, at the same time reflective of our modern cruel society of the TikTok generation and X-mob. Having never been able to fit in anywhere, having never a romantic relationship, having never the charm, the pizzazz or finesse of a gentleman, having never a loving father, but a distant, abstract one, and a semi-narcissistic mother who made him guilt-trip over her never having a relationship, having never reached the zenith of self-actualization despite being a genius in his field with encyclopedic knowledge, Peter felt like trash. Utter trash. The lowlifes, the untouchables, the Dalits, the invisible, the pariah, the bizarre, the fringe, the outcasts. What difference was he in the nihilistic cosmic cogs and gears of Nataraja's dance of Maya? Nothing. Nada. Zilch. What difference would it make if he wasn't even born, like Magritte's man reading a newspaper? Sarah still wasn't sure if Peter was thinking these things 5 hours earlier at McDonald's by Dobson Street. She was in a state of catatonia. The coroner wasn't sure if he fell in the garbage bin from the 4th story, was pushed by the kids who were seen earlier breakdancing on the rooftop with the boombox, or if Peter just plain suffocated himself with a shopping bag to take out the trash that he considered himself to be. As one of the medics were to zip the bag shut, it got stuck. Oh great, Tiffany thought. It was another one of those days. She retched as she caught a brief whiff of the stench of the body from the dumpster, and suddenly a tiny fly came buzzing. It hovered over the body for 3 seconds, and then a few seconds later another came. Tiffany went to get another bag as the other 2 paramedic officers undressed him from the shroud while waiting for Tiffany. "Jesus Christ, man!" Chris shouted suddenly. There was a small cloud of flies pestering them all now. Although they were all masked up and took every precaution against contaminations, it was just bothersome, plain bothersome. As annoying as the pulling of bikini wax. Yes, the buzzing wasn't hitting them with a sledgehammer, but rather bothered them like small cuts, or like a thumbs down button on a post. Soon, dozens and dozens of flies swirled in the air like a tornado. It was already an overcast sky in December, and as the ominous sign didn't bode well, many started to retreat and recede, calling it the Sigil of Diablo. "The kid was weird, I tell you, man," a man said with a deep Hispanic accent. "Look at that," another pointed. Pretty soon the body was being overtaken by a blanket of smoky nanoparticles as more and more pointillist flies swirled, gathered, and clouded over the corpse. Then there were hundreds, if not thousands of nanobots of spite and dark spirit, which seemed to overtake the entire proceedings. A swarm of about record 3,000 flies gathered, buzzing over the scene. Many in the crowd got worried and left. Many were curious. Of course, those who knew nothing about some random creepy guy did not see much to it. But among those who did was a single solitary figure. Her face was stone like a statue. She was cold and silent and was observing the whole incident with a chilly gaze. Finally, she understood. She was a convert now. She felt his spirit, the spirit that longed to be recognized, ushered, kindled, felt, celebrated, and applauded. The spirit that was no longer with her, but forever etched in her heart. The presence will finally be with her forever. "Now he is with them!" She shrilled like a banshee in a tone so overpitched that only an ethereal being would pick it up. In her hands was a tome on nymph flies. Peter's last order from Amazon that came in yesterday. "He is with them now," she nodded catatonically. The old trunk. My mom passed away last month. We all suspected it was because of a heart attack, though none of us could say for certain that that was how she died. She simply passed away, as if all of her at once had just shut down. It was like her soul had decided to just move on, and that was that. My dad hadn't been in the picture since I was little, so my mom's property had been left to me in her will. I started cleaning out the place, finding things I would want to keep and other things that would be better off given to Goodwill. I recently finished up with her shed when I decided next I would clear out the attic and just work my way down through the house. While up there, I found pretty much anything one would expect when thinking of an older woman's attic. Dilapidated mannequins that held old pieces of clothing, stacks of cardboard boxes strewed around everywhere, and small knickknacks and curios like a cracked pair of glasses or a ballerina figurine whose meanings and nostalgic purposes have faded in time. I admit the curiosity and lost memories of these last few items tug at my heart for reasons I couldn't fully describe, but otherwise, I found this to be tedious, boring work. That was until I pushed a few more overly packed cardboard boxes to the side, and I came upon a dusty lockbox with a heavy padlock keeping it latched shut. What I initially found curious about this was how thick the lock was to keep such a simple-looking box sealed. Then I noticed the dust wasn't as thick and very distinct lines marking the lid of the trunk, as well as the padlock. I realized these marks were those of fingers, as if someone not too long ago had opened the trunk and looked inside. The only person who that would be, of course, would have been my mother. It quickly became important to me that I see what was inside this trunk. What was so important inside that my mom had to look inside so soon before her passing? I dragged the locker downstairs and sat it on a table. I dug through my mom's room, trying to find the key for that ancient lock. I tore through dresser drawers and rifled through coat pockets in the closet. With a heavy sigh, I dropped on the bed. When I did so, I heard a faint metallic clang. I lifted the mattress, and sure enough, there was the key, lying against the bed frame's metal lining. I rushed downstairs with the key clutched tight in my fist, and unlocked the footlocker with such a feverish excitement, the likes of which I haven't felt since I was a child on Christmas. It was such a bright curiosity, I had to see the contents of this box, that my fingers were visibly trembling. When I opened the lid, my heart sank. Not in a dejected way, but in a sort of relaxed, of course kind of way. Inside the box were no secret jewels or ancient gold, but photographs, dozens of photographs. I smiled, and I felt my eyes getting wet. Of course, somehow my mother knew her time was close, and she decided with her limited time that she was to look in this old chest for the richest treasure of memories. I scooped them up carefully, as if I were picking up a newborn puppy. I found old photos of my grandpa holding me as a baby. There were pictures of my grandma and her friends, and my uncle doing a stereotypical uncle face at the camera. I came upon a photograph of my mom. She was young, maybe 11 or 12 years old. My smile deepened as I looked at how little she was, standing in her room with a wide grin on her face, blissfully unaware of the future. And then I saw a weird stain on the picture. A smudge on the corner of the ceiling that looked like a frenzied silhouette of a man looking downward at my mother. I set the photo down and looked at the next one, and I frowned. It was another picture of my mom. She was about 16 in this picture, as she sat on a park bench, and there was that same shadow. It loomed over her on the park bench, as if it were trying to look at something in her lap. I shuffled through the pictures, my frown deepening as I did so. In each of the pictures of my mother that I looked at, each one she was a little older, and that shadow a little closer. Here's a photograph of my mother with her arms wrapped around me on my 6th birthday, and the shadow in the picture, this twisted visitor, squeezed its 2 long fingers over my mom's shoulders as it looked down at me from behind her. Its eyes had become visible now. Two orbs of deep red glowering down at me from its perch on my mother's shoulders. The last one was the final straw for me. The initial tremor in my hands from the excitement of opening the box had turned to quaking shivers that ran up and down my body as if I were sitting on a waterbed filled with needles. My spine felt contorted and awkward in my discomforting anxiety. I know what some of you might be thinking reading this. Some people enjoy ideas of the supernatural and the macabre, but I refuse to believe in something like that, in monsters who lurk in the unseen. The ghoulish visitor who seemingly stalked my mother for her whole life in these photos was nothing more than lens flares, spilled coffee stains, and practical jokes. And I wasn't going to let this be something that could get to me. I wasn't going to let something so trivial as a boogeyman disturb me like this. I took the stack of photographs, regardless of whether or not they had the creature over my mother pictured, and I tossed them into the fireplace. I know it was a trick of my overworked imagination, but for a split second, I thought I saw an impassioned shadow of a disproportionate man reach up from the smoldering film. I finished my work on the house for the day, and I lay down in my bed. Throughout most of the day, I had managed to shove the idea of that apparition in the photos out of my mind, though now that I lay here, the dim glow of the outside streetlights piercing in, I felt my mind reaching towards it again. I did my best to shove the idea out of my mind, to ignore it all, yet there was now a question brewing in my mind and trying to escape from my lips. It was a question that felt important, gravely important, whose answer I knew would be detrimental to the remainder of my life, however much longer that may be. As I kept my eyes locked open and looking upward, this question ran laps around my mind like a frenzied creature locked in the gaze of a predator. What is that fucking thing on my ceiling? Ding Dong Ditch. Lou wasn't sure what made him more nervous, the dilapidated house with broken down cars and metal scraps as lawn, or the encroaching darkness of the forest slowly closing in on him as night fell. He rubbed his left knuckle with his hand and swallowed a lump. "Are you sure about this, Reggie?" "Don't be such a wimp. Just do it," Reggie said. "What if they call Mom and Dad?" "We're all the way down Marlow Road. Whoever lives here has no idea who we are." Lou looked at the house and wondered if it had been beautiful once, with dark green paint and a flower bed, maybe a swing set in the backyard. Maybe the people who had lived there had been happy. He wondered what had happened. What could have gone so wrong? Or maybe, Lou thought, it had simply always been this way. "Can you go first?" Lou asked. "It's my birthday, and I say you go first," Reggie replied, and then he punched Lou in the arm. "Ow, hey!" "Shh, they'll hear us." Lou rubbed his knuckles with even more vigor. "Look, it's easy. You sneak up, press the doorbell, and then run back here," Reggie said. Lou didn't move. "You can do this, Lou. Be brave. I promise this will be fun. Trust me." Reggie gave his brother a tap on the shoulder. Lou bit his lip, exhaled, and said, Okay, here I go." Lou crept out of the trees towards the house. He stayed low, imagining himself as a ninja, moving on to enemy territory. He reached the side of the house, then snuck around to the front, keeping his body against the wall. He noticed old paint chips sticking to his sweater and rubbed them off. He crouched even lower as he reached the front window. Light from a television set danced light on the drawn red curtains. Then Lou stopped. His stomach churned as a rancid stench hit his nose. He started to gag. "What are you doing? They'll hear you," Reggie said in a loud, breathy voice. Lou covered his mouth and pinched his nose and froze in place. He looked down and saw that he was stepping on something dark and squishy, with hard, off-white chunks in it. "Come on, Lou, you're almost there." Lou stepped over the squishy ground, hopped up the 2 concrete steps, and pressed the doorbell. Ding dong, ding dong. Making no attempt to be sneaky about his retreat, Lou sprinted back to the forest fringes where Reggie waited. "Oh my God, that was awesome!" Reggie said as suppressed giddiness leaked out of him. Yeah, it was," beamed Lou. The front door of the house creaked open, and the brothers ducked down, covering their smiling mouths with their hands. They peered through the twigs of their camouflage as the door opened a few inches. Lou squinted. It was very dark inside, and he thought he could make out a bony hand holding the doorknob. After a moment, the door gently closed. The boys snickered through their hands. "That was crazy," Lou said. Yeah, so crazy," Reggie replied. A silence fell over the boys. Lou opened his ears to the nothingness, looking for sounds other than his fast-beating heart. "Do it again." "What? No, it's your turn now." "It's my birthday, and I say that you do it again." Lou looked out through the twigs. The TV was still on. The yellow light above the front door flickered. "I don't like it here, Reggie," Lou said. "You just said it was exciting." "I said it was crazy." "It's the same thing." "It smells bad over there." Reggie turned and bored holes into Lou's skull with his gaze. "Do it, or I tell Mom about the magazine." Lou's eyes went wide. "What magazine?" "The one you keep in that crack in your closet. The one with the boobies." Lou felt his stomach tighten into a knot. He turned and looked at the house again. "Fine, but only one more time. It's getting dark." "You have to ring it 5 times, Reggie said. "What? Come on, Reggie." "If it's the last one, you have to do it 5 times, or else." Reggie cupped his hands on his chest and made a squeezing motion with his fingers. Lou scowled and slowly stood up. "When my birthday comes up, I'm gonna make you regret it." Lou moved out from behind the bushes and moved towards the house again. He covered his nose and his mouth in anticipation of the wretched stench and moved around the slimy stuff. Reggie put his hands to his mouth to hide his giggles. He watched as Lou hopped up onto the concrete steps and put his finger on the doorbell. Through his smiling teeth, he counted Lou's pushes in quick succession. 1, 2, 3, 4. The door opened and closed so quickly that all Reggie saw was the blur that used to be his brother, now gone. Lou's green shoe lay on its side on the concrete. Reggie's smile evaporated. "Lou?" The yellow light flickered again. "Lou, come on, man. Quit playing around." Reggie waited. "Lou! Lou! Lou! Lou!" Reggie yelled, coming out of his hiding spot. Reggie took a step forward before his blood stiffened him in place. Through the blinds he saw a face, long and emaciated, with eyes the color of his mother's lipstick. It looked straight at Reggie and smiled. "Ding dong," the face mouthed, but Reggie heard it as if it were right there next to him, breathing hot air right into his ear. Reggie turned around and ran back through the woods, down the old overgrown dirt driveway, his breathing fast with panic. Ding dong, ding dong, ding dong, ding dong. Heavy footsteps cracked the branches on the ground behind him. Reggie started to cry. No, no, please, Reggie sobbed. Ding dong, ding dong, ding dong, ding dong, ding dong, ding dong. Reggie tripped on a dead log and fell to the ground with a thud. He felt long, cold fingers grab his head from behind and cup his eyes. Reggie screamed. Hey, who's there? The fingers let go and Reggie covered his head, still screaming. He felt a hand on his back and he screamed again. Hey, it's okay, the voice said. Reggie's screams turned to sobs. He looked up and saw a man in his 40s with a reflective tracksuit on and a headlamp. Reggie tried to form words but could only form slobbery vowels. Lou, I'm sorry. Reggie sat on the couch in his living room, wrapped in a blanket, with a neighbor next to him. He could hear his mother crying in the bedroom. He couldn't hear his dad. The police had gone to the house and told Reggie that it had been abandoned long ago, that there was no TV and no smell and no doorbell. They said they would search the woods for Lou early in the morning. The police left and his mother cried herself to sleep. His father put on his boots and jacket and said he was going to go look for Lou. He didn't look at Reggie. Reggie didn't know when he'd fallen asleep or what time it was. All he knew was that it was still dark outside. The lamp next to him flickered. He heard a shuffle outside, like footsteps. A faint, disgusting smell hit his nose. He heard something like breathing. The doorbell rang. Ding dong. Thank you to everyone who's checked this installment out. This means a lot to us, as we love to show support to upcoming artists, musicians, authors, basically anything. If you're doing something creative, and it's something that we enjoy, we are more than happy to help in sharing and getting your work out. We'd like to give a gigantic thank you to all the authors who allowed us to read their stories. Please check the video description to see the authors' names and some of the links to their works. This was something quite enjoyable for us, and we hope to do more of this in the future. So please like this video, comment, share, and make sure that you're subscribed to the channel. Until next time, sweet dreams.